we go. That's better. We're clear now. Welcome to the University of British Columbia's Educational Technology 540 documentary on the transition from radio to television and its effect on culture, literacy, and education. I will start with a short overview of the history of the radio and television and then move to discuss the impact of these communication technologies on culture and our learners in the classroom. The rise in communication technologies has made the global world seem increasingly smaller as the world population continues to grow. Changes in technology are connecting people in ways that was never previously imagined. Changing technology has the ability to mediate factors in human culture, literacy, and education. According to Boltler, new technologies emerge to replace or supplement existing technologies. The change from one medium to another to create a new technology is called remediation. Remediation involves competition and integration of ideas to create a new technology that claims to be better than the one it's set to remediate in at least one, if not several, senses. In the 1800s, electricity and magnets were used to write at a distance using the telegraph and its alphabet of dots and dashes called the Morse code. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the electric speech machine, or the telephone. This was the first time voice communication was sent over a distance. The downside of each of these machines was that it had to be connected to wires. This restricted communication transmission in distance and in space. In 1885, German physicist Heinrich Hertz's ideas and experiments were able to produce the first wireless sounds, but all that appeared was static. Motivation for wireless communication came from the need for ships to be able to communicate in case of an accident to help save lives and property. Guglielmo Marconi used information produced from Hertz's experiments to produce the first wireless signal. In 1899, an SOS communication from the wireless radio that was donated by Marconi for demonstration purposes saved lives when there was a collision between two ships. Officially, though, wireless radio transmission happened when the dits and das of Morse code were sent from Ireland to Canada on December 12, 1901. The next breakthrough in wireless transmission came when the sound of human voice was transmitted over airwaves instead of the dots and dashes of telegraphy. Marconi's work paved the way for Canadian Reginald Fessenden, with the first actual voice transmission coming on December 23, 1900. The transmission was made from an island in the Potomac River to an associate a mile away.
1, 2, 3, 4. There you are, Mr. Houston. Coming right back. Let you know.
The reply was affirmative, and as they say, the rest is history. Although the first voice transmission was made in 1900, Fessenden's 1906 Christmas Eve broadcast is the best known for early voice wireless transmission.
Good evening. This is Professor Reginald A. Fessenden, speaking to you from Brant Rock, Massachusetts, at the tower of the National Electric Signaling Company.
The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 proved to be a capstone event that made the radio an essential technology of the 20th century. A state-of-the-art Marconi radio system sent 30 to 35 distress signal messages from the radio room in the Titanic. These signals were heard as far away from Italy, but a ship 4 miles away did not hear them because the radio operator was off duty. This tragedy resulted in the Radio Act of 1912, which stated that 2 radio operators needed to be on all ships so that round-the-clock radio coverage was maintained. The safety affordances of the radio meant that it was here to stay. In the late 1800s through the 1920s, the original ideas for television were centered around being able to see the person you were talking to on the telephone. Many inventors, scientists were coming up with the designs for seeing at a distance, and in March 1877, the New York Sun published a letter to the editor that said, "An eminent scientist of this city is said to be on the point of publishing a series of important discoveries and exhibiting an instrument invented by means of which objects or persons standing or moving in any part of the world may be instantly seen anywhere and by anybody."
Using two competing methods for broadcasting, Charles Jenkins of the United States and Scotsman John Baird in England broadcasted the first television images, which contained silhouettes and stick figures. But the first long-distance transmission of live picture with simultaneous voice occurred on April 9, 1927 by Bell Laboratories and the U.S. Department of Commerce. Today we have, in a sense, the transmission of sight for the first time in the world's history. Human genius has now destroyed the impediment of distance in a new respect, and in a manner hitherto unknown, said the Secretary of Commerce, Hubert Hoover. The general public remained largely unaware and untouched by television until 1939, when the World's Fair showcased the first presidential speech. The New York Times review of the demonstration says, "The problem with television is that people must sit and keep their eyes glued on a screen. The average American family hasn't had time for that." Color television was demonstrated to the Federal Communication Commissions in 1946 by Peter Goldmark, and in 1950, color television was released to the public. The years between the 1930s to 1950 were known as the golden age of television, and a time where rapid expansion and growth occurred. The next major breakthrough in television was in 1962 with the first transatlantic reception of a television signal via the Telstar satellite. Satellites significantly changed the realm of communication around the world. Instead of waiting days or weeks for a tape broadcast to appear, real-time visual and audio communication was available. Neil Armstrong's 1969 landing on the moon was broadcasted for the whole world to see and watch through television sets in real time. In 1975, subscribing cable viewers could see the broadcast of a heavyweight fight, the Thrilla from Manila, between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. These two popular events connected the world in a shared experience, and thus the television revolution began. Technology needs to be understood for both what it contributes to a culture and what it takes away. Postman believes that it's a fundamental truth that technology will change a culture. Radio technology is a communication medium that is oral and focuses on the auditory senses. Radio broadcasting represented views and beliefs of the current era and was similar in some regards to oral cultures where the word held much power. Television added a visual element to radio's auditory elements, as print added visual to the oral culture. The addition of facial expressions, body language, and background context left less to the imagination of the viewer. Newman felt that television would shift societal values towards lack of imagination, instant gratification, and the need for constant stimulation. Newman also felt that the introduction of television would affect activities such as the use of other media, including radio listening, cinema attendance, and to some extent, play with other children. The instantaneous communication of mass media like radio and television afford can facilitate the coming together of communities as it creates a sense of closeness. Although this communication takes place among people who can be distant in space and time, its effects can feel as real as face-to-face communication. Radio and television overcome barriers that print could not by reaching millions of people around the world instantaneously. Walter Ong refers to radio and television as secondary orality. Ong describes secondary orality as essentially a more deliberate, self-conscious orality based permanently on the use of writing and print. Literature culture and the existence of writing are two requirements of secondary orality. Secondary orality relies on the literate thought and expression, which means that communication is not as repetitive and redundant as the primary oral communication. As well, in a literate culture, actions such as reading are individual activities and tend not to promote interaction with others. Secondary orality often requires reading of a written script, which is being shared with others, which creates interactions among people and closer global communities. With advances of radio and television technology, it was hoped that competent and imaginative teachers in any community can and do use teaching aids such as school broadcasts to stimulate and verify classroom expressions of youngsters. A teacher's ability to create a lesson using any of the communication mediums could impact the ability of students to learn, as students have individual learning needs that can be addressed using a variety of media. Technology in the classroom means that students no longer have to rely on their teachers as being the bearer of all educational information. Students are exposed to worldly views and have access to much more information than a textbook or teacher can provide. One caution here is that teachers need to be aware of whether students are getting
Television requires a shift in cognitive processes as radio listeners participate orally while television is multisensory. One fear that is often discussed is the possibility of negative impact that the radio and television technology have on reading and writing. There are many television shows that do promote literacy, and one of the most popular educational children's shows is Sesame Street. Newman, a critic of television, states in his displacement hypothesis that time spent viewing television is time away from other activities such as reading. Another critic of television in education is Neil Postman, and he says, watching television not only requires no skills, but develops no skills. Postman also believes that television is turning society into an audience in need of constant entertainment. In contrast to Newman and Postman's beliefs, some studies do show educational television programs may in fact be beneficial to the development of literacy in children. Peltier reports on a study that showed literacy gains for children who are exposed to high-quality children programming compared to control groups who are not exposed to such programming. Moses reports that children viewing shows of high information value and content, such as Sesame Street, did not displace time spent that may be deemed more important in literacy development, but to use television viewing to supplement, not replace, other literacy experiences. Lineberger agrees that an appropriate combination of television and print produces opportunities for enhancing literacy experiences and outcomes. The general consensus is television is not necessarily good or bad, but it can influence literacy development in positive and negative ways, depending on the program, how much time children spend watching television, and whether an adult watches with the children, and much more. Radio and television have been an important part of our communication technology since the first half of the 20th century. The advancements in technology led to the ability to communicate large amounts of information over great distances, which brought the global community closer together. Butler's concept of remediation says that old forms of communication have not really disappeared. All technology has its strengths and weaknesses. The strengths of technology are being combined to form ideas that can coexist or become elements that are incorporated into others. People choose to use many different forms of technology in order to take advantage of the strength of each form. The impacts of technology on literacy and education can both be positive and negative. The increase in the availability of information meant that teachers were not the bearer of all information, and thus greater amounts of learning could take place outside the classroom. Technology can be a tool in education and must be used appropriately to achieve suitable results.